Hello everyone, welcome to my channel Bold and Beautiful. Today she didn't work on my brain. Bill and Finn are surprised by Liam's revelation. Did Grace fabricate the news of Liam's cancer? Finn seems untrustworthy. When Bill announced on Friday that Liam's MRI had been returned and that the tumor had disappeared following this experimental surgery, Finn Finnegan appeared extremely dubious. Since the edges are obvious, there shouldn't be any regrowth. However, Finn was astonished and somewhat suspicious, stating that it was not only a medical miracle for Liam but also a medical first since the brain tumor was malignant and inoperable. I must admit that I didn't think it would be a phony illness, but after going back and reviewing all of Grace's previous episodes, I discovered that she hasn't had many. And I'll demonstrate these warning indicators for you all. Naturally, the question is whether she was successful in fabricating Liam's cancer. And was this something more sinister or just a crime of opportunity? The cancer of Liam Spencer identification and management. All of this began as a result of Liam experiencing vertigo following his heated disagreement with Bill. April 2nd was the date. And since it would have been kind of intriguing, I was actually checking to see if it began on April Fool's Day. However, it was April 2nd. However, Liam fell on April 3rd, the following day. After hitting his head on the coffee table and creating a large puddle of blood, he crept outside. Liam was located by Steffi Forrester. He was taken to the hospital by her. On April 4th, Grace became involved with Liam's medical condition for the first time. I believe that everything that had occurred up to that moment was most likely legitimate. Liam flatlined in the emergency room, and Grace operated on him to treat a brain bleed. And that was medically legitimate. The next time we saw Grace, however, was on April 18th, a few weeks later. She also informed Finn and Bridget Forrester that Liam had brain cancer, which was an incurable disease. Beautiful and brave, where's the oncology team? Therefore, the question is whether Grace noticed anything in Liam's head during the surgery or if she only noticed the brain bleed and decided to do something here after giving it some thought for a few weeks. Although we've never seen them, Grace said there was a neuro team. Grace, a cardiologist rather than an oncologist, has handled Liam's cancer case entirely. All of those are red flags. Then, on April 21st, a few days later, Grace called Bridget to confirm Liam's diagnosis. That might sound like a big fat call to no one, but it was just Bridget's performance. Then, while he had this terrifying cancer, Grace was off-screen for a whole month. Disappeared for a month. On May 21st of that year, she informed Liam that there were treatments that might extend his life. Grace also suggested chemotherapy and radiation, and she urged Liam to undergo these treatments because she believed they were urgent. However, we went all the way from May 21st to July 3rd due to the urgency and the seriousness of the cancer. It would be well over a month, nearly 6 weeks, before she returned. Grace then informed Finn that Liam truly needed to undergo this treatment. At that point, Grace also began receiving odd calls and texts. Is a plot twist planned? On July 4th, the following day, Finn informed Grace that he was aware of her stress levels due to her daughters and her ex-husband. Since fans were grumbling, I'm not even positive if Bold and the Beautiful began this narrative as a fictitious disease or if it began as a real one and changed course along the way. They were merely rewriting the story of Eric Forrester's cancer. Because from the beginning, I don't think Bold truly knows what they're doing. And I have undoubtedly witnessed them shift course. We all have, I believe. Luna Nozawa shot Liam, and on July 9th, he arrived at the emergency room. Grace wanted to operate on Liam herself, but Finn said, no, it can't wait. He also brought Liam to the operating room. That didn't sit well with her. Sheila Carter was shot in the toe by Luna, and Grace ended up licking off the remainder. She's reduced to 8 little pigs, you know. However, Grace also insisted that the staff confirm and inform her on Liam during Sheila's surgery. Grace was completely absorbed in Liam. Bold and the Beautiful, a turn for Grace? That continued throughout the program on July 10th, when she inquired about Liam once more. Then, on July 14th, while Liam was still unconscious following his gunshot surgery, Grace arrived to examine him. Bridget joined Hope Logan and Steffi Forrester, but not before Grace pushed them out of the room while she went to see how Liam was doing. Grace then persuaded Bridget to accompany her family. That she sent another doctor away to pretend to be alone with him was all extremely odd. When Grace and Liam were by themselves, she became agitated and said, "They can't lose him." I believe Grace was worried about losing whatever this paycheck was at that moment. Bold and the Beautiful, no involvement from the mysterious doctor? Grace overheard Bill saying that he would stop at nothing to save Liam, who was still unconscious, the following day, July 15th. Before Liam awoke from the gunshot surgery, that is. Grace overheard and then came to tell Bill about this incredible experimental procedure, which could save Liam's life but was exceedingly costly. Naturally, Bill leaped at the chance. She did a wonderful job on this. Liam was then moved from the hospital to the private clinic by Grace. Then, on July 16th, Grace and this unidentified physician performed the surgery to remove the inoperable tumor from Liam's head. We never saw that guy touch Liam, even though the other doctor was allegedly the specialist she had flown in for the procedure. Grace was the one who requested the scalpel and made the incision on Liam's head. Okay, so that's the chronology of each of these episodes. However, it was somewhat difficult to see the overall picture because Grace was only sometimes and irregularly on Bold and the Beautiful. However, I was like, when I went today and looked at her entire episode list, going over each episode's summary to create this list. Okay. Examining Grace Buckingham's contribution to the alleged false cancer scheme and her potential motivations. The other thing is this. Due to Liam's history of concussions, which we have observed over time. He had that amnesia thing with the whole Adam and Eve thing, you know, and Quinn Fuller had that too. He fell on the plane while traveling to Australia, and then he hit his head again. Therefore, it's possible that the dizziness at Bill's that day was caused by an old injury or something else. That's simple to explain. You know, perhaps Liam was experiencing a panic attack or anxiety attack due to the stress of that awful disagreement with Bill. As a result, he became lightheaded and briefly lost it. Liam then struck his head against Bill's coffee table, which opened the door for a woman in dire need of money. I believe Grace began to see dollar signs after she underwent surgery to treat the brain bleed. I mean, this might have been a completely made-up tumor in Liam's brain that Grace created. Or she exaggerated the situation, and while there might have been a minor issue in his mind, perhaps some scar tissue or something, there didn't have to be anything. I should also mention that, as you may recall, Liam has been exhibiting severe symptoms over the previous few months. From the moment Grace revealed he had brain cancer until this miraculous surgery, they ran. However, I can also explain that to you. Bold and Beautiful, the crazy side effects of medication. We observed Liam taking his prescription drugs from Grace on a few occasions during this time. Additionally, Hope gets Beth's allergy medications from the hospital pharmacy, not the CVS across the street, so everyone on Bold and the Beautiful gets their medications there. This is nothing new to us. I remember it precisely. Liam then displayed the bottles. Therefore, I believe Grace utilized medicine bottles with his name, along with painkillers, cancer drugs, and other items that would be typical for someone with that illness. Again, this is not a spoiler, but I believe this to be the case. I believe that this is what is taking place. I have a very strong theory. However, I believe that Liam's medicine bottles contained a variety of medications, including ones that genuinely contributed to his tiredness, sluggishness, and lightheadedness. Grace could have caused Liam's symptoms with a variety of off-label medications. For example, taking blood pressure medication when your blood pressure is normal can cause vertigo. You may become fatigued as a result. There are numerous drug options that could be the cause of Liam's behavior. Grace switches brain scans in Bold and the Beautiful? If this is indeed a scam, I believe Grace gave Liam drugs that would not kill him but would produce frightening symptoms that would resemble the progression of cancer in order to pressure him into giving her a miraculous cure. Perhaps she had always intended to offer Liam some kind of secret miracle treatment, but after he was shot and she overheard Bill Spencer, she said, "Oh, okay. Because he is needy and has more money, he becomes a greater target for the scammer." In all honesty, Grace might have requested $5 million from Bill Spencer. He most likely would have said, "Okay, here you go," if she had asked him for $10 million. Keep Liam safe. Cost is irrelevant. I can tell you more about the brain scans. If this is all a hoax, I believe Grace simply added Liam's name to images taken from a real brain cancer sufferer. Since Bridget and Finn had never seen an oncologist or a neuro team, Grace could have shown them phony scans and fabricated lab results. The brave and the beautiful. Is miracle surgery a big myth? Additionally, I believe Liam's miraculous operation was a major hook and switch. In fact, I think the physician Grace brought in wasn't a medical professional at all. Maybe Dr. Reese Buckingham was stolen by an actor or a loser buddy of her terrible ex-husband. They may have shaved a small section of Liam's hair. His scalp was only partially cut apart by Grace, who immediately stitched it back together. To give Bill the impression that surgery was truly taking place, they stood there for an hour, I don't know, playing Wordle on their phone or whatever. They probably didn't even break through Liam's skull and get to his gray matter. That's my opinion. Since Liam is most likely still recovering from the initial gunshot surgery, Grace would also feel at ease allowing him to return home to Bill Spencer's house with monitors and a home nurse. Furthermore, the most recent MRI that Grace mentioned, the one that miraculously removed the tumor, could be a genuine scan of Liam's healthy brain, excluding the bleeding that she stopped, or it could be just another fraudulent scheme. And I might be completely mistaken about Grace, you know. Liam may have had a medical miracle, but I highly doubt it. And I'm just as suspicious of all of this as Finn is. Brave and lovely, are you in need of Grace? Perhaps Grace was in dire need of money. She believed that since she was lying, there was no harm or malicious intent. You know, Bill could afford it, and she didn't give Liam an illness or anything. Therefore, it's possible that Grace believed it to be a victimless crime. I'm particularly interested to see if Grace panics and simply flees the country with Bill's money, or if Finn begins to question her. Grace obviously needed the money somehow. Maybe she needs to help someone out of trouble, her ex Reese, something like that. She kept the remainder to fund a new beginning in a different location after using a portion of it to assist them. I can't say for sure why Grace would have fabricated Liam's cancer, but the calls and texts are clear evidence. To be honest, I can't claim with certainty that Grace really staged Liam's cancer at this time, but I do think there are enough warning signs to warrant a halftime performance. Let's see how it turns out. That's my theory, though. That's the only evidence I've given you. There are numerous receipts. Since it's July sweeps, I anticipate a significant revelation regarding Liam and perhaps Grace as well. See for yourself. Ivy pines for him, Grace acts shady, and Liam gets back together with his daughters. Hope and Steffi inform Liam that they have experienced a significant miracle at Bill's. He will be able to watch his young daughters grow up and won't be leaving them. His mind is totally clear, according to Bill. Steffi assures her former partner that they will be together for a very long time. Liam laughs incredulously and sobs. Hope makes the decision to bring the children over by calling the nanny. Bill is taken aside by Finn, who tells him how wonderful this is. This is not typically how cases like this end. It's a miracle, says Bill. Finn appears doubtful. Bill tells Hope and Steffi that he would do anything for his boy, even though they weren't sure if it would work. Bill tells Hope and Steffi that he would do anything for his boy, even though they weren't sure if it would work. Finn is bringing the girls up, Steffi and Hope declare. He shows them in. Hope assures them that there is nothing to be concerned about, even though their father was in the hospital. He begins displaying all of his tubes after telling the children that it makes him happy to see them. They tell the girls that despite his hardships, their father is a true hero. They have a lot to anticipate, and Liam won't be leaving anytime soon. There will be a lot of dances between fathers and daughters. I've never spent a better $1 million, Bill murmurs to himself. Brooke, Ridge, and Taylor are debating whether to postpone their trip to Italy at Forrester. Katie and will burst in with exciting news. They explain that extraordinary brain surgery was used to cure Liam. Ridge believes they ought to be appreciative. "It's great," says Brooke. Will is happy that he will have the opportunity to know his older brother better. To find out more, Taylor chooses to give the hospital a call. Ridge is looking for people to give thanks to. Will is aware that his father has recently made some foolish choices. Ridge goes on and on about that. Will notes that it was a good thing to save Liam's life. They are amazed by all Liam has done this week and how much he has to live for. Will is beginning to believe that his brother is eternal. Taylor has a few more queries. Liam Spencer's cure, the complete eradication of his supposedly inoperable, cancerous brain tumor following a secretive, experimental surgery funded by his desperate father, Bill, landed not with universal jubilation, but with a palpable wave of suspicion radiating most intensely from Dr. John Finn Finnegan. Finn's stunned, almost accusatory reaction, framing it not just as a personal miracle but as unprecedented medical history, wasn't merely professional skepticism, it was a glaring narrative flare illuminating the deeply unsettling trail of inconsistencies, convenient absences, and medically implausible events meticulously chronicled throughout Liam's cancer ordeal, all pointing towards a single, disturbing conclusion, that Dr. Grace Buckingham, leveraging her position and Liam's vulnerability, masterminded an elaborate and cruel fraud. While initially dismissed as a tragic twist in Liam's tumultuous life, a retrospective deep dive into Grace's sporadic but pivotal appearances reveals a pattern of manipulation so calculated it strains coincidence, suggesting Liam's dizziness after arguing with Bill on April 2, the subsequent fall and head injury on April 3, leading to Steffi finding him and rushing him to the ER, and the life-saving surgery Grace performed for a real brain bleed on April 4 were the unfortunate seeds of opportunity that Grace, perhaps facing her own desperate circumstances, decided to cultivate into a monstrous deception. The legitimate medical crisis provided the perfect cover. Grace, acting far outside her specialty as a cardiologist, resurfaced weeks later on April 18 to deliver the devastating, out-of-the-blue diagnosis of an inoperable brain cancer to Bridget and Finn, immediately raising the critical question, did she genuinely observe something suspicious during the bleed surgery? Or was the tumor a complete fabrication born in the intervening weeks? The conspicuous absence of any neuro-oncology team throughout Liam's entire cancer journey, a case bizarrely managed solely by a cardiologist, stands as the first deafening alarm bell, compounded days later on April 21 by Grace's performative phone call confirming the diagnosis in front of Bridget, an act easily staged for an audience. Her subsequent vanishing act for an entire month during Liam's most terrifying period, only to reappear on May 21 suddenly pushing urgent radiation and chemotherapy with ominous warnings, followed by another inexplicable 6-week absence until July 3, despite the purported urgency, paints a picture not of dedicated care, but of calculated minimal involvement, reappearing only when necessary to reinforce the illusion or escalate the pressure. The timing of Liam's shooting on July 9 became another critical juncture, Grace's aggressive insistence on operating on him again, Finn's refusal, and her subsequent preoccupation with Liam's status even while operating on Sheila Carter, revealed an obsessive focus incongruent with standard medical detachment but highly consistent with protecting a significant investment. This obsession bled into July 10 and reached a fever pitch on July 14 when Grace, examining the unconscious post-surgery Liam, deliberately engineered solitude by shooing away hope, Steffi, and crucially, fellow Dr. Bridget, her frantic whispers, "We can't lose him," suggesting not medical concern, but panic over the potential collapse of her scheme and the loss of her anticipated payoff. The very next day, July 15, provided the damning opportunity, eavesdropping on Bill's vulnerable pledge to do anything to save his son. Grace swiftly materialized with the offer of an astronomically expensive, off-the-books experimental surgery, a perfectly timed solution presented to a uniquely susceptible Mark. The surgery itself on July 16, shrouded in secrecy at a private clinic with a specialist flown in whom we never saw actively participate, Grace requested the scalpel, Grace made the incision, lacked any verifiable medical substance, strongly suggesting a macabre charade, perhaps a superficial scalp incision meticulously sewn up while time was wasted. A performance designed solely to extract Bill's millions without ever genuinely invading Liam's skull, leaving him recovering only from the legitimate gunshot wound surgery, not the fictional tumor removal. Liam's documented symptoms during his cancer battle, often presented as irrefutable proof of the disease's reality, are chillingly explainable within the fraud framework. Grace, controlling his medication sourced from the hospital pharmacy, as seen in prior storylines, likely prescribed bottles labeled as cancer or pain meds but actually containing drugs deliberately chosen to induce symptoms like dizziness, weakness, and lethargy, off-label use of blood pressure medication or other agents. Easily mimicking disease progression, thereby manufacturing the evidence needed to sell the cure. The diagnostic foundation itself crumbles under scrutiny. The initial MRI scans and lab tests shown to Bridget and Finn could easily have been falsified, scans lifted from a real cancer patient with Liam's name superimposed, a deception feasible due to the complete lack of independent oncology verification. Grace's likely motive stems from desperation, potentially linked to her nefarious ex-husband, Reese Buckingham, of Baby Beth kidnapping infamy, hinted at by her receiving cryptic, stressful calls and texts throughout the ordeal, needing significant funds, perhaps to extricate Reese from trouble or finance an escape. She seemingly rationalized targeting the wealthy Spencers as a victimless crime, believing Bill could absorb the financial blow and Liam would ultimately be physically unharmed. Ignoring the profound psychological trauma. Finn's mounting suspicion, culminating in his visible disbelief at the miracle MRI result Bill presented on Friday, is the narrative's validation, signaling the walls closing in. If Grace did orchestrate this, her panic at Finn's probing questions could trigger flight with Bill's money, or a desperate attempt to silence the threat. While the possibility remains that the show pivoted mid-plot from a genuine cancer story to a twist, perhaps due to fan fatigue echoing Eric's recent cancer arc, the meticulously documented timeline of Grace's actions, her medical overreach, the manufactured symptoms, the staged surgery, and her financial desperation collectively form an overwhelming case that Liam Spencer's cancer was not a tragic diagnosis.